There we go. Beautiful. So a little bit about me. It's probably more like a bit over 15 years experience as an accredited practicing dietitian now. Getting old. It's a bit sad, but unfortunately it happens to all of us. Um, I'm a certified fertility dietitian with Nutrition Plus. I have a special interest in fertility, gut health, PCOS, and endometriosis, which is probably why I've been invited to speak today or tonight. I'm Monash Low FODMAP, OptiFast, and weight management psychology accredited. I'm also a member of ACNAM, so that's the Australasian College of Nutritional Medicine, Channel 9 News dietitian, and that's kind of my really short bio. So I like to keep that one short. I don't want it to take up half of the presentation time, like some people's bios do. Anyway, so when I think endometriosis, and I think when a lot of other people think endometriosis, a lot of people are actually that don't live with endometriosis, or we'll call it endo. A lot of people think that women with endo get intense cramps and maybe have painful periods. But the truth is, and it's been absolutely enlightening, and it's like opened my eyes to what some people have to deal with in our population. And kudos to those living with endometriosis, because there's a lot to it. And when I was putting this slide together, I thought intense cramps just does not do it justice. So what people don't really know a lot about endometriosis is and this isn't even an exhaustive list. This is just maybe some of the main ideas out there that people living with endometriosis might have to put up with. Weight gain, painful periods, headache, back pain, bloating, mixed bowel movements, tiredness, fatigue, really heavy periods, infertility, pelvic pain, nausea, painful intercourse, painful urination, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So, wow, like the amount of patients that I see that finally go, enough's enough, I want to do something about it, but they've been living with a lot of these symptoms for some of them over a decade, just putting up with it. I don't know how people can do that. It's maybe my pain tolerance is nowhere near to the magnitude of some people living with endometriosis. So I thought I'd start off tonight's presentation with a bit of a case study, and like I've called this person Callie, but the patient's name is obviously de-identified. It's not actually Callie. I just wanted to put a name to a case study. And Callie came to see me after being diagnosed with endometriosis about a year ago. She noticed a whole bunch of symptoms that you can see there, things like nausea, vomiting, back, leg, and stomach aches, things like that. She went for laparoscopy November 22 and felt better afterwards. She had a history of irregular periods leading up to that. Had been told she just had irritable bowel syndrome. So that's a very common diagnosis or misdiagnosis when it comes to endometriosis. And last time I checked the stats, it can take up to 10 years to actually get an official diagnosis with endo. And yeah, like it says there, a lot of the time it's misdiagnosed as IBS. Reported pain after going to the toilet, stressed, and essentially stopped exercising. So we'll go into a lot of this stuff as we go through the presentation. Weight at the time of assessment was 90 kilos. She skips breakfast. Kelly overeats mid-afternoon and evening, probably compensating for the lack of food in the morning. She was an emotional eater, turns to carbs and then feels guilty afterwards. But from memory, it was more around, I'm feeling pain, I'm feeling low energy, I'm skipping meals, so I'm developing this emotional eating pattern of restricting and then and then overeating and making poor food choices. Other medical history: acid reflux, small ulcer on the esophagus, B12 injections, iron fusion, and she's got a family history where her sister is living with polycystic ovarian syndrome and celiac disease. So, what did I decide to do with Kelly? So, I encouraged Kelly to join my 12-week endometriosis program. So, it includes 6 sessions over the course of 12 weeks. I felt like there was plenty that Kelly could do in terms of her diet, and I thought 6 sessions would be a great start to set her on her way to improving her lifestyle factors with specific focus on her diet and be able to hopefully reduce some of her endo symptoms. So initially, I developed a meal plan for her, which was calorie adjusted. So that wasn't the main focus, but there was definitely a focus of losing some weight, some kilos. And the meal plan comprised of 3 well-balanced meals per day with healthy snacks in between. So none of that skipping. And you can see here, these are some of the items that we worked on. So cutting down on red meat consumption because there's good evidence around red meat and poor endo symptoms. Increased non-starchy vegetable consumption to try and not cut out carbs, but try and maintain blood sugar levels at a pretty normal level instead of big peaks and troughs. Introduce nuts and seeds and legumes, so lots of plant-based ingredients. 3 servings of whole grains a day, so things like brown rice, basmati rice, quinoa, things like that. Worked on increasing fiber and fiber variety, so kind of touched on that already with some of the other points. And we were focusing on increasing her omega-3s, so upping the fish to 2 times per week. So that's like a serving of salmon, so just like a normal size serving of salmon that you can buy in the supermarket. We measured Kelly's weight all throughout the process using a body composition scanner that measures not only total weight, but water, visceral fat, so the fat around the organs, which can be quite inflammatory, muscle mass, and it was a great way to measure the intervention in terms of the diet side of things, but also the exercise side of things as well. And we talked about strategies to combat emotional eating, which I think was probably one of the first things we did because it was quite the problem. I introduced a prebiotic called partially hydrolyzed guar. It was about 6 grams a day. And I made sure that Kelly graded that up slowly so it wasn't like a huge bomb that was dropped into her large intestine. That's a really concentrated prebiotic, and if taken straight off the bat in full dose, it's an absolute shock to the system. And you don't know how you go socially. There'd be a lot of gas, a lot of farting, and potentially some mixed bowel movements if you went on that pretty quickly on full dose. And just to top up her omega-3s, I recommended some omega-3 supplementation. So a really powerful anti-inflammatory, antioxidant that has been found to be fantastic in terms of endo outcomes. So the outcomes of the 12-week program were, may I say, extraordinary. Kelly was really compliant. She'd had an absolute gutful of her endo symptoms and wanted to do something about it. So she was super compliant with my recommendations. And these are the outcomes that Kelly exhibited. So more regular periods, gastrointestinal symptoms were just so much better after about the 3rd week. She reported heaps more energy, less mood swings, good reductions in pain. She lost a whole 13 kilos of weight. And one thing I hadn't mentioned is Kelly was doing a lot of this so she could freeze some eggs, future-proofing because she had endometriosis. She was very interested in freezing some eggs to save up for a rainy day, just in case she wanted to have kids down the track. Because as you probably know, the older you get, the harder it can be to conceive. So really good news story, that one. And it's an absolute pleasure to go over it again, and hopefully you can see there the power of nutrition. All right, so the diet that we essentially went for with Kelly was a anti-inflammatory diet, and I've put up this slide here because if you Google anti-inflammatory diet, you get a whole bunch of different things. And this study, as you can see down on the bottom left-hand side here, it's a randomized control trial. It looks really, really credible. But when you actually look at all the different foods that are associated with inflammation, according to this study, we're talking about wheat, we're talking about gluten-containing grains, corn, soy, dairy, all dairy-containing products, nightshade vegetables. Oh, don't cut out the nightshade vegetables if you can avoid it. Citrus, fruits, beef, pork, shellfish, eggs. Oh my goodness. Trans fat, fair enough. Processed oils, fair enough. Processed sugar and sugar added foods, fair enough. Caffeine, alcohol, peanuts, peanut containing products. So all these foods, according to this literature here, this article, are associated with inflammation. And we know that endometriosis is an inflammatory condition. So if we're living with endometriosis and we're popping in a whole bunch of inflammatory based foods, then we're probably going to experience worsening symptoms. However, I guess the point of this slide is there's a lot of foods there that are actually anti-inflammatory or contain lots and lots of different um, vitamins and minerals, like eggs, for instance. And you don't necessarily have to cut out gluten and dairy, but it's definitely a case by case basis. And a lot of the recommendations online will be cut out whole food groups, cut out dairy completely, cut out gluten completely. Where there's some really good nutrients within these food groups, and there's a possibility that you don't have to cut it out completely. Don't have to be so black and white. You could eat low amounts of gluten rather than being completely gluten-free, for instance. So it's really, really, you've got to be really careful when you going online and checking out all the different articles and literature and information on which foods are inflammatory and which ones aren't, because like if you cut out all these foods on this list here, what is left? Like we're cutting out nightshades. Nightshades are awesome, so long as you can tolerate them. All right, moving on. So in terms of anti-inflammatory foods, I've chosen some key groups of foods that I really would love you to incorporate within your daily meal pattern. So it goes without saying, vegetables. Eat the rainbow, lots of different colors, textures, and flavors. The dark green vegetables specifically, so the cruciferous vegetables, seem to be really, really nutrient dense and full of anti-inflammatory compounds compared to some of the others. So broccoli, bok choy, pak choy, broccolini, spinach, kale, things like that. Fantastic veggies, but all veggies are very nutritious. Evo, so you can see that at the top of the tree. So that's extra virgin olive oil. So I'd recommend putting at least a teaspoon of extra virgin olive oil per person per meal, and that's over and above cooking with extra virgin olive oil. Whole grains, really important source of soluble and insoluble fiber, which is really important for gut health. And also, if you cut carbs completely, um, you'd be surprised what kind of damage you could be doing. So, in terms of like when we cut carbohydrates, and in particular, when we're cutting our whole grains, we're actually slowing our thyroid down. And what do you think you get when you slow your thyroid down? You get weight gain. So it's really important that you just don't go for it with things like this, and that you get some personalized advice from your health practitioner. Then you've got oily fish, which we've already covered before. Seeds, so full of healthy fats, lots of fiber, once again, similar with nuts. And then you've got fruit. So eating different types of fruits is fantastic. Some are more specifically better for in and around exercise, like bananas, because they're a lot more sugary. And then you've got the other end of the sugar continuum, the low end, and that's your berries. So your blueberries, your raspberries, your blackberries, and your strawberries. So eating a variety of different plant-based foods specifically, combined with a little bit of oily fish and maybe a bit of chicken and the odd serving of red meat or pork, things like that. And you've got yourself a pretty well-balanced meal pattern. And I've just popped up an example of what 30 grams of fiber looks like in a day. And you can see an example of a pretty healthy day. So breakfast is muesli with yogurt and berries. Lunch is essentially a pretty beefed up salad. It's got avocado, olives. What else have we got in there that's pretty significant? Pine nuts, and it's got some butter beans in there too. So that's going to keep you fuller for longer, high in fiber and fiber variety, full of antioxidants, anti-inflammatory foods. And then dinner is some salmon with some basmati rice, which is the best rice you can get, with a whole bunch of veggies. So if you consume, say you consumed the meal, that meal pattern over on the left-hand side there, you would almost be there in terms of getting the ideal amount of anti-inflammatory food. So remember, endometriosis inflammatory, a real great dietary strategy to combat endometriosis is to consume anti-inflammatory foods. But the icing on the cake here is these anti-inflammatory dietary compounds. So you may have heard people talking about curcumin or turmeric, or cacao powder, things like that. You can see here there's a whole bunch of examples of different foods or spices that contain anti-inflammatory dietary compounds. So they can just take you through to the next level in terms of achieving that anti-inflammatory load. So if you're not including these types of anti-inflammatory dietary compounds within your daily meal pattern, then you probably should from now on and see if you notice any difference in terms of your symptoms. And essentially, what we're looking for is a version of, I guess, the Mediterranean diet. So, this study here by Wenzel, I think that's how you pronounce it, at the 2011 World Symposium on Endometriosis, found that those consuming the Mediterranean diet found a significant reduction in dysmenorrhea or painful periods, a reduction in painful sex, and a reduction in hard to pass stools. So the Mediterranean diet within this study was an abundance of plant-based foods, so your fruits, your vegetables, your legumes, your nuts, your seeds, your whole grains. Desserts were more like fresh fruit and goat's cheese. The main fat source, as I mentioned before, extra virgin olive oil. The main animal protein was fish, poultry, and eggs, a bit of lamb and goat. Red meat and beef were rarely consumed within this study. Wine in small amounts with main meals, and the food was locally sourced from farms around the area, and there was significant activity involved as well. So eating really healthily, lots of different plant-based foods specifically combined with some proteins and some healthy fats, plus a whole bunch of physical activity, or not necessarily planned physical activity. It was more incidental. So the Mediterranean diet can work really well. It can be hard to follow and adhere to, but it seems to be our best diet when we're talking about endometriosis. So I wanted to go over some traffic lights in terms of foods for endometriosis. So you can see the green light here. So green light on foods like vegetables, fruits, whole grain, seeds, oily fish, legumes, extra virgin olive oil. And over on the right-hand side there, you can see the anti-inflammatory foods that contain those anti-inflammatory compounds that I was saying will take you through to the next level. So your cacaos, your turmerics, things like that. What's interesting is that in the middle here, I've kind of like I was a bit on the fence as to whether these are healthy or not. Looking at the research, um, you can get some really healthy omega sixes, but there's an issue when it comes to this thing called the omega three omega six ratio. I hope I'm not putting you to sleep here talking about this stuff. Obviously, omega threes coming from marine fish like salmon, trout, Spanish mackerel, herring, sardines, tuna, things like that, right? If you overconsume omega six, the omega 3 omega 6 ratio becomes less desirable. And when you've got that less desirable omega 3 omega 6 ratio, you have what's known as inflammation and oxidative stress. So, what you would be doing there is you would be further increasing that inflammatory load that already exists in the person living with endometriosis. Now, there are some very healthy versions of omega 6 like tofu, walnuts, and peanut butters. But there are also a lot of really unhealthy versions of omega 6. So, any kind of vegetable oil, I highly encourage you not to use vegetable oil, not to use any other vegetable oil other than extra virgin olive oil. And that even goes for olive oil. Don't have olive oil, have extra virgin olive oil because it contains the anti-inflammatory compounds that we're looking for. But you'll notice that vegetable oils in particular are in everything. So think of all the processed foods that when you flip them around and have a look on the back, it will say, like even in hummus, you'll see canola oil. That's no good for endometriosis. So it's important to find a hummus that actually uses extra virgin olive oil instead of, say, canola oil or vegetable oil, because it'll be less inflammatory and you'll be adding less inflammation to the inflammatory pool, which equals less symptoms. So that one's a bit of an amber one because you can really overdo it. Yeah, I guess you could probably overdo walnuts. You could eat way too many walnuts in a day, and that would also affect your omega-3, omega-6 ratio. But generally speaking, not many people overdo walnuts, so that's okay. Walnuts are very, very nutritious. And then you've got the foods that you absolutely must keep an eye on and try and reduced to a pretty small amount. So anything with saturated fat in it. So we know that saturated fat, as well as trans fat, I might as well go into that one too. So we know that saturated fats and trans fats are inflammatory. And if you're that type of person that's eating the fat around the porterhouse steak, then that's where you're getting all that saturated and trans fat from. You'll also get trans fat from things like margarines and highly processed foods and pastries and things like that. You'll get saturated fats from anything of animal origin, and all the different animal foods vary in the amount of saturated fat that they contain. But it's always good to try and keep those types of fats on the down low. I've talked about vegetable oils already. I'll talk about refined carbs a little bit later on and excess energy. So when we increase our weight, that's also inflammatory. Actually, I'm going to talk about that later as well. What I want to talk about specifically right now is the AGEs, or the advanced glycation end products. So as the acronym states, AGEs, or advanced glycation end products, age us. So they're inflammatory molecules that we can't avoid. We can detox them through healthy lifestyle practices, lowering stress, lowering our toxic load, using glass Tupperware instead of plastic Tupperware, things like that. But the interesting thing about these advanced glycation end products is that when we're, depending on our cooking method, we could potentially be ingesting a whole bunch of these inflammatory molecules when we didn't even know it. So if you're that type of person that when you toast some toast and you just scrape off some of the burnt toast and then proceed on, then you're literally eating these inflammatory products. So throw the toast away, put another couple of pieces in the toaster, and off you go. Same could be said with our meats. So our meats, our chickens, our fish. If we overcook them, if we absolutely char grill the hell out of them, what we're doing is we're consuming these inflammatory molecules called AGEs. Also, if we eat too much refined carbohydrate all in the one meal, we get this huge glucose spike, as you can see down the bottom right-hand corner there. We get this huge glucose spike, and then we get this subsequent insulin release to try and lower our blood sugars again. That process is inflammatory. So that's why I kind of mentioned, keep an eye on your carbohydrates, because if you're eating a really carbohydrate rich meal that doesn't come with that many other friends, so other foods, you're going to get a pretty big spike, and that's going to be inflammatory, and then that inflammation will just contribute to that inflammatory pool. Also, the more blood sugar peaks and troughs that you have, the more you create advanced glycation end products within your bloodstream. So the glucose will attach to things like fats and proteins and create these molecules. Whereas if you have really steady blood sugar levels, so, breakfast a little spike, lunch is a little spike, and dinner's a little spike in glucose because you've eaten meals, not like huge peaks and troughs, then that's a great way of reducing your exposure to these advanced glycation end products. Just try and remember, don't burn anything. So don't burn your meat, don't burn your protein, don't burn your toast. And then, or the other thing you just need to remember is try and keep your blood sugar levels pretty within a pretty normal range, rather than a blood sugar roller coaster that you would get if you were to consume, say, toast for breakfast, toast with jam and butter. You're looking at the beginning of a blood glucose roller coaster of a day. You might have spaghetti bolognese with not that much meat sauce, a truckload of pasta, and some garlic bread on the side. That would be a really big glucose spiking meal. So this is just a couple of examples. All right, so moving on, talking about some different forms of inflammation and how they can just worsen the picture for someone living with endometriosis. So over on the left-hand side, you can see a lean person with normal metabolic function, so neutral inflammation, good metabolic control, and good vascular function. You can see the fat cells here, and you can see that they're all relatively small compared to what you can see over on the right-hand side there. And the fat cells in a lean person, in fact, fat's like an organ. So think of it as like one big organ. These fat cells in the lean person release anti-inflammatory compounds like this adiponectin down here on the bottom left-hand side. So having small fat cells, or be living within a normal weight body, within the normal range, the fat cells will actually be anti-inflammatory. As we put on weight, our fat cells get bigger. And then we start to release both some anti-inflammatory, but also some pro-inflammatory adipokines. So you can see I've just highlighted that in the red box there. And then as we move all the way to the right-hand side, you can see an overweight or obese person with metabolic dysfunction. We get this huge increase in inflammation. We get this huge decrease in metabolic control. And that will no doubt impact on the person living with endometriosis. And in the case study with Kelly, you saw that she lost 13 kilos in my 12-week program. And I dare say that a massive contributor to the reduction in her symptoms and the normalization in her menstrual cycle would have come from the immense amount of weight that she lost there. Other sources of inflammation that could be worsening your situation. So gut health. And I'm going to talk about gut health towards the end of the presentation as well. But I'm just going to touch on this slide here, because as you can see in the picture, you've got a cross section of a large intestine. When you don't have bacterial diversity, so lots of different types of bugs, you get this thing called dysbiosis. And what we see is you get this dominance of potentially mucus degrading specialists, so mucus eating bacteria. And because they're not diluted out within a very, I guess, diverse ecosystem, they dominate the ecosystem. So they eat away at that force field or that mucosal lining. And then other bacteria might come along and start feeding on the intestinal cells. So this is what can happen if you're not eating much fiber. So in a fiber-free diet, you generally get this dysbiosis that creates inflammation, and then that inflammation is no good for the person living with endo. I've talked about the inflammation from this blood sugar roller coaster here, so I might just skip this slide because I've already tackled it. Okay, so to the non-breakfast eaters out there, or the lunch skippers, or the erratic meal patterners, so people whose diets are all over the shop. This here is an example of what I ate one day. So this was based on 3 main meals. And you can see up the top there, energy was 59% of my estimated energy requirement. You can see that protein was at 70%, and then you can see the rest. I'm not going to go over them all. But you can see down the left-hand side, all these vitamins and minerals, they're key to health and well-being. And about half of them are anti-inflammatory vitamins and minerals. So I thought it'd be good to showcase I mean, this diet is by no means perfect. And, I'm the food police because I'm a dietitian, but I'm also human. So some days I can't reach my requirements, whereas on other days I'm absolutely smashing them. And I think that's okay. I'm always striving to do better, but I'm not giving myself a hard time about it. What I thought might be interesting, because there's a lot of people that I'm seeing in private practice at the moment that don't eat breakfast. They might be intermittent fasting, they just might not be breakfast eaters, etc. And so I took breakfast off both days of this 48-hour food diary and watched the reduction in nutrients. Here we go. That's a pretty significant drop. Now, I know everyone's talking about how fasting's awesome and I feel fantastic and all this kind of stuff. What about your vitamins and minerals? What about your anti-inflammatories? If you're not eating all the different foods to get your nutrition requirements, then you're not putting the inflammation fire out, and your endo would probably be worse. I'm sure there's examples where people absolutely swear by only eating 2 meals a day. But if they're only eating 2 meals a day and they're getting this kind of pattern or even better, then fantastic. But what happens a lot with intermittent fasting is people just don't achieve their requirements. So there it is again. Just quickly flick through it. Breakfast eater, non-breakfast eater. All right. So why the focus on gut health? I spoke at the Endo WA symposium last year, and apologies if people that have signed up for this webinar I were there as well, because this might be going over a few things that were similar. But essentially, one of the main focuses for me as a practitioner working with people living with endometriosis is to focus on the gut, because there is a truckload of research, systematic reviews, like good quality papers that suggest that good gut health or microbial diversity, so lots of different bugs in your large intestine, correlates with improved symptoms in terms of endometriosis. And I'm just going through, current updates on the role of microbiome in endometriosis, the gut microbiota in endometriosis from pathogenesis, so development to diagnosis and treatment. Gut microbiota promotes what is it? Metabolites promotes gut microbiota and microbiota derived metabolites promote endometriosis. So that would be a picture of dysbiosis or unbalanced gut health. The gut microbiota, a double-edged sword in endometriosis, totally. If you've got good gut health, it's great for endo, but if you've got bad gut health, it'll make things worse. Associations between endometriosis and the gut microbiota. Researchers have studied this stuff over and over and over again. And what's really interesting is, like I said before, microbial diversity has been reported to be lower in endometriosis. And there's this thing called beta glucuronidase, and it metabolizes estrogen. But if you have too little of it or too much of it, it can really not work in your favor and be bad for you. So a microbial balance enables the right amounts of this beta glucuronidase to metabolize the right amount of estrogens. And as you probably know, endometriosis is a estrogen dominant condition. So if there's a way of reducing too much estrogen traveling around in the bloodstream, then I'm sure you'd sign up for it. And that is improving your gut health. So dysbiosis, or that imbalance of bugs in your gut, decreased beta glucuronidase activity. So lower circulating estrogen was the outcome of that. And that was associated with obesity, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, and cognitive decline. Now, increased abundance of beta glucuronidase, so too much of it, too much bacteria that produce this molecule, can lead to elevated levels of circulating estrogen and drive diseases such as endometriosis and PCOS. So once again, it's just about that balance. So if you're eating a whole bunch of different plant-based foods, you're going to get that amazing bacterial diversity that'll keep that beta glucuronidase in balance, so not too little and not too much. Here's some prebiotic foods, some champions of the gut health world. So a lot of these different foods have actually been shown to provide a therapeutic effect to the gut, and therefore an anti-inflammatory effect to the system, to the body, and therefore better management of endometriosis. They'll also help to grow your microbial diversity, which, as I've just demonstrated, can be pivotal in managing your endometriosis in terms of detoxifying and getting rid of high levels of circulating estrogens. So if I was to put your endo diet on a plate, it would look like this. So you've got your potentially dairy, not saying for everybody, potentially dairy. Some people would absolutely swear by the fact that when they cut out dairy, they feel a whole lot better. And I can't argue with that, but it'd be great to work out what your limit is instead of just cutting it out completely. Or maybe you go for lactose-free dairy instead, or a soy milk. But these oat milks and rice milks and almond milks are essentially water. And unless they're fortified with calcium, I can see an osteoporosis paradigm shift occurring because of the rise in popularity of these plant-based milks. We've mentioned whole grains, so good quality fibers, variety of fiber types there, protein-rich foods, including the plant-based versions of those protein-rich foods, so legumes, lentils, nuts and seeds, things like that. Healthy fats we've spoken about, herbs and spices to get those anti-inflammatory compound levels up, vegetables we've spoken about, and fruits. I don't find this useful. Some people do. I'd probably find something more like the one I put up before with the example of what breakfast, lunch, and dinner could look like. But I guess if you're looking at a checklist for the day, then this is kind of your checklist there. So in terms of anti-inflammatory foods, some of them I've been telling people to eat 30 plus plant-based ingredients per week for years. And there's a new show on Netflix around the gut. I don't know if anyone here has seen that one. But I saw the preview, and the lady who was being interviewed was saying in an American accent, we should be aiming for 30 plus plant-based points per week. And I was like, hey, that's mine. I recommend that all the time. So this worksheet here helps you get there. So it's a way of recording. And you could just do this in your notebook if you wanted. So basically, every time you eat a new vegetable, for the week, you write it down in the vegetable column. And so if you ate broccoli on a Monday and that was the start of your week, you ate broccoli on a Monday, you write in broccoli and you get a point for it. But if you eat broccoli on the Tuesday, you don't get a point for it because you've already eaten it that week. And so what this encourages you to do is eat a whole variety of vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, legumes and pulses, grains, herbs and spices. And that, my friends, will increase your microbial diversity and therefore improve the estrogen, circulating estrogens, and hopefully your endometriosis symptoms, plus all the other benefits that you get from head to toe, mental health, etc. Now, some of you might be saying, yeah, that's great, Nick. Like you're telling me to eat garlic, but I know that garlic makes my life so much worse. So there are many women living with endometriosis. I guess, like as you can see there in the second point, women with endo are 5 times more likely to be diagnosed with IBS. So if you have irritable bowel syndrome or irritable bowel syndrome like symptoms, then eating something like garlic could potentially worsen your gut health, create inflammation, and then add to your already inflammatory, high inflammatory pool. So I'm definitely aware of this phenomenon here. And the symptoms can overlap. And it's funny, a lot of my endometriosis patients will say, no, that bloating was because of my endo. That was the endo talking. That wasn't something I ate, and vice versa. So it's funny how we can differentiate between what's causing the bloating on any given day throughout the cycle. So the overlapping symptoms include visceral hypersensitivity, bloating, diarrhea or constipation, pain when you do a number 2, nausea, and that's supposed to be vomiting, but it's missing, and of course, reduced quality of life. So working with a dietitian to help you navigate these symptoms whilst also still aiming for that increase in microbial diversity through eating the 30 different plant-based foods is the name of the game. And you're not going to find anything on the internet that's going to help you with that, because everyone has very different everyone has a very different picture when it comes to endometriosis, which foods they trigger to, which ones they don't, which ones they're only moderately sensitive to, which ones they're only slightly sensitive to, and which foods they're super, super sensitive to. So it's important to work with a health professional on that one to actually navigate through that sea of confusion so that you don't cut out foods. And I stress this so importantly, you don't cut out foods unnecessarily, because when you start to restrict foods, you start to decrease all the different types of foods that you consume, and then you're not achieving your 30 plus plant-based foods. You're eating less. You're getting more of this dysbiosis picture, gut dysbiosis, which is pro-inflammatory, and you enter into this cycle, which can take a fair bit to get out of. All right, we're almost done. You may have heard of the low FODMAP diet and endometriosis, and I'm when I was a baby dietitian, I used to, if anyone had any kind of IBS-like symptoms, I'd be like, bang, onto the low FODMAP diet you go. Nowadays, I'm very, very selective as to who I recommend does the low FODMAP diet. So the low FODMAP diet essentially cuts out foods that are harder to digest. So they're generally medium chain carbohydrates. They're generally in every food or most foods to a certain degree, which is why we say low FODMAP diet, because it's almost impossible to cut out FODMAPs completely. So it stands for fermentable oligosaccharide, disaccharide, monosaccharide, and polyol diet. So take what you want from that acronym. I just call it a low FODMAP diet, and it's basically cutting down on the foods that your gut has to work harder to digest. And by going on this diet, you can give your gut a bit of a break. But if you give your gut too much of a break, you'll get this dysbiotic picture where you've got this lower microbial diversity and your symptoms will worsen over time. So I've sometimes come across women with endometriosis that have been on a low FODMAP diet for about 2 years. Once they first started on the low FODMAP diet, they felt great. Unfortunately, the symptoms started to come back slowly but surely. And that's because of that huge restriction in food intake and diversity, and therefore that narrowing of the microbial diversity in their large intestine. You don't have to do the low FODMAP diet in its entirety. You can kind of pick and choose based on your experience and your health practitioner's clinical judgment. You can play around with maybe just reducing, low FOD or reducing high FODMAP vegetables, for instance, but keeping everything else normal. So you can have a real tailored approach here where you don't have to go on the cookie cutter low FODMAP diet, which is highly restrictive, could potentially for some people be fantastic, but for others might not even yield any benefits at all. So I wouldn't even touch this diet if I wasn't experiencing any gut-related symptoms. And in fact, you really need to have mixed bowel movements throughout the whole month, not just around your period, and have significant abdominal discomfort, maybe some pain, abdo pain, things like that to even consider it. So happy to answer questions on that one later because I've only got the one slide on it and I could do a whole presentation on it. So another thing that some people are opting for is this phenomenon called gut-directed hypnotherapy. So it's hypnotherapy for your gut. It's like a gut meditation each night. There's an app called Nerva, and for those who don't want to go on a low FODMAP diet, sitting down for 15 minutes a night, listening to a guided meditation on your gut could be good for not only your gut, but also your mental health. A great way to unwind at the end of the day. That's a paid program. Look up Nerva if you want to sniff around and have a look into that one. Other considerations which don't have time to cover today would be a gluten-free diet, a low nickel diet, and like I said, the gut-directed hypnotherapy.